Around 3100 BC, Egypt was unified under Pharaoh Narmer through the conquest of Lower Egypt by Upper Egypt. Narmer is also identified as Menes, who according to classical tradition unified Egypt and founded the first dynasty. This is due to the fact that Menes is absent in the archaeological record, while there is a wealth of evidence for Narmer's claim of unification. His name Narmer means raging catfish. His successor, HOR-AHA, was probably his son. He was not as known outside of the Nile Valley as his father, possibly because of the decreased trade and an increased use of local resources under his reign. He was buried with servants who were sacrificed so that they could serve him in the afterlife, in what is called retainer sacrifices. This practice existed only in the first dynasty. Eventually, little statues were made in their place and buried with the pharaohs for this purpose. Next came Djer, HOR-AHA's son, followed by Djet, Djer's son, and then Djet's son. Den is the most archaeologically attested to pharaoh of the Early Dynastic Period. He was the first to use the title King of Lower and Upper Egypt. At the start of his reign, he shared the throne with his mother, Meritneith, who ruled as regent because he was too young. Under his reign, Egypt began to use a numbering system using hieroglyphs, which helped mark important events and the calculation of taxes. Then came Enedjib, who may have been old by the time he came to the throne, and probably had a short reign. He introduced a new royal title, the Two Lords, referencing the state patron deities, Horus and Seth, and symbolically pointing to Lower and Upper Egypt, legitimizing his role as king of Egypt with this title. His successor and possibly son or brother, SEMERKHET, didn't use this new title, seemingly because he was more attached to his other title, Two Ladies, referencing two goddesses, the patroness of Upper Egypt, Nekhbet, and Lower Egypt, Wadjet, who were worshipped as joint patrons and protectors of all of Egypt after unification. SEMERKHET seemed to have had a difficult time as pharaoh, with some ancient historians reporting a calamity occurring during his reign. The Cairo stone, although badly damaged and mostly illegible, does seem to report on events during his reign, with the quote, destruction of Egypt happening in the first year of his reign. Then came Ka, who had a long and prosperous reign, but became the last king of the first dynasty, when after his death a dynastic war began between the royal houses. During this time there were possibly two opposing kings, SNEFERKA and HORUS, who fought to gain control of the throne, ultimately being brought to an end by Hotepsekhemwi, the founder of the second dynasty. His name means the two powers are reconciled. He was followed by Nebra, who was the first king to use a sun symbol in his royal name, before the sun was properly thought to be a god, and before pharaohs were thought to be living representatives of this sun god, Ra. After Nebra came Ninetjer. He is the most archaeologically attested to king of the second dynasty. It seems that he split Egypt in two, so his successors could more easily administer Egypt. And so Senej, Neferkara, and Hujefa sequentially ruled Lower Egypt, while Seth-Peribsen and Sekhemib in turn ruled Upper Egypt. Egypt was reunited again under Khasekhemwy, the last king of the second dynasty. During his reign, he undertook considerable building projects, temples and tombs and other structures of yet unknown purpose. He was followed by his son, Djoser, the founder of the third dynasty. He commissioned the first pyramid of Egypt, his famous tomb, the Step Pyramid, created by his famous chief architect, scribe, and high priest, Imhotep. Following Djoser was his brother, or probably eldest son, Sekhemkhet, who also erected a step pyramid at Saqqara, but it was not completed, possibly because of the king's sudden death. Senakht may have succeeded him, possibly followed by Kaaba, who may have built an unfinished step pyramid, followed by Huni, the last king of the third dynasty. He is long remembered in Egyptian tradition, but few documents or monuments of his endure, which brings us to Sneferu of the fourth dynasty, who built at least 3 pyramids still around today: the Bent Pyramid, the Red Pyramid, and the Meidum Pyramid, were remarkable examples of the progress they had made in building technology and the ideology regarding the king's burial site. Then his son Khufu became king. He built the famous Great Pyramid of Giza, and possibly the Great Sphinx as well. Or maybe his son, Djet built the Sphinx in honor of his father. Even still, a great number of Egyptologists think the Sphinx was built by Khafre, who was also the son of Khufu. He also built the second largest pyramid of Giza. He's described as a cruel ruler. Possibly following Khafre was Bekeres, a pharaoh of who little is known about, such that many believe him to be fictitious. Next came Menkaure, the son of Khafre, who began the building of the third and smallest pyramid of Giza. He apparently alleviated the suffering that his father's cruel reign had caused. He was followed by Shepseskaf, who finished the building of the third pyramid of Giza. He was likely the last pharaoh of the fourth dynasty, although some records include a certain Thamthis, who lacks archaeological evidence and so may be fictitious. Which brings us to Userkaf of the 5th dynasty. Under his reign, the cult of Ra, the sun god, gained prominence, effectively becoming the state god of Egypt in the 5th dynasty. Userkaf built a temple dedicated to Ra in Abusir. He was followed by his son, Zahur, whose name means he who is close to Ra. His reign marked the political and cultural high point of the 5th dynasty. The Egyptian navy flourished and made multiple expeditions for trade as far east as Lebanon, and probably as far south as modern-day Sudan, Ethiopia, and Somalia, where they traded for trees, gold, aromatic resins, ebony, ivory, turquoise, and copper, among other things. In Egyptian art, Zahur is depicted as gardening and celebrating these expeditions. In his palace garden named Zahur's Splendor Soars Up to Heaven. Zahur built the Pyramid of Zahur in Abusir, the location of the Sun Temple built by his father. It was much smaller than the pyramids built in the 4th dynasty. He also built another Sun Temple called the Field of Ra, which has not yet been located, but it is presumed to be in Abusir as well. Zahur was venerated long after his death. Around the 18th dynasty, he was equated with a form of the goddess Sekhmet. The cult of Sekhmet of Zahur had priests and attracted visitors from all over Egypt to Zahur's temple, and lasted up until the end of the Ptolemaic period, nearly 2500 years after Zahur's death. He was followed by SNEFERKHA, who was known as a kind and benevolent ruler. He also built a sun temple called Site of the Heart of Ra, which is said to be the largest such temple in the 5th dynasty, but it has yet to be found. SNEFERKHA was also the center of a funerary cult like his predecessors. After his death, the West Kar papyrus was likely written, a tale which describes how Userkaf, Zahur, and SNEFERKHA were brothers and the sons of Ra. Neferefre ascended to the throne after his father. He also began but never finished a sun temple, as his reign was possibly as short as 2 years. He was followed by his uncle, Shepseskar, who had an even shorter reign of a few months, although it's possible that he was a usurper from outside of the royal family, who lost the throne to Niosur. He was the most prolific builder of the 5th dynasty, having built 6 pyramids in the necropolis of Abusir for him and his family. He also built the largest surviving temple to the sun god, called the Joy of the Heart of Ra. Then came Menkaure. Beyond the construction of monuments, the only known activity dated to Menkaure's reign is an expedition to the copper and turquoise mines in Sinai. Menkaure also built a sun temple called the Horizon of Ra. He was the last pharaoh to build a sun temple. He was followed by Djetkare Sesi, who enjoyed the longest reign of the 5th dynasty, reigning for some 40 years or so. He implemented comprehensive reforms of the Egyptian state administration and priesthood, which worked to decentralize some powers away from the king and an increase in provincial governance, which may have contributed to the breaking down of the Egyptian state after the 6th dynasty. He also broke the tradition of building temples to Ra, the sun god, possibly because of the rise in popularity of Osiris, the god of the dead. Next came Unas, who maintained trade with neighbors and military actions in Canaan, but it proved to be a period of economic decline for Egypt. Under his reign, governance continued to be decentralized. Unas was the first pharaoh to use pyramid text carved in his tomb. These texts were meant to help the king reach the afterlife. They identify the king with not only Ra, but with Osiris, whose popularity continued to rise. After a short succession crisis, Tidi ascended the throne, beginning the 6th dynasty. During his reign, some high officials began building funerary monuments which rivaled that of the king, a sign of the ever-increasing decentralization of power and wealth away from the pharaoh to other officials. According to one account, Tidi was murdered by his palace guards, or possibly assassinated by his successor, Userkar. Although some consider Userkar a short-lived usurper to the throne, some consider his reign legitimate. He was succeeded by Pepi I, the son of Tidi. Pepi faced the further decline of the pharaoh's power, which he tried to strengthen through allegiance by marrying two daughters of a powerful family. There may have been two foiled conspiracies against Pepi, who, despite it all, had a long reign. He was followed by his son, Merenner-Tiemsaf, who in turn was followed by his son, Pepi II, who may have been one of the longest reigning monarchs in history, since he was a child when he ascended to the throne, and some ancient records attribute to him a reign of 94 years, but modern Egyptologists suggest that it's more likely that he reigned at least 62 years, but no more than 64. Pepi II's reign marked a sharp decline of the Old Kingdom, as the power of the provincial governors continued to grow, and the power of the pharaoh continued to decline. With no dominant central power, local nobles began raiding each other's territories, and the Old Kingdom came to an end soon after Pepi II's reign, which was followed by two pretty short reigns. First of his son, Merenner-Tiemsaf II, who ascended the throne as an old man and reigned for just a year, and was followed by Djer, who reigned 3 years, and was the last king of the 6th dynasty and the Old Kingdom.